Jerry Palm, who is with us. Jerry, CBS Sports college football analyst. Jerry, how are you today? What's going on?
I'm fine. How are you guys?
Doing well. This is really, really fascinating to us. We've enjoyed discussing this. Now, the first couple of weeks, the rankings came out. I mean, you react and you move on. You don't pound it to death. But there's limited scenarios now that could play out in terms of the Final Four. And I guess I think the biggest question for most people, can Carolina, and you'd have to lay out the events if you see that that's possible, can they slide into the top four under any circumstances?
Well, I guess what would have to happen is, first of all, they have to win big. They can't just barely win. They have to win big. Margin of victory is definitely an important factor to this committee. They'll never say it out loud, but it's pretty obvious by the rankings that they are. North Carolina's schedule is awful.
Yeah.
Their loss to South Carolina is awful. And the committee is holding both of those things against them. If they just beat Clemson in a reasonably close game, they may not even put Clemson below North Carolina, because Clemson still would have had a much better year in spite of the fact that they would have lost the head-to-head. The committee does a pretty good job of respecting head-to-head, but they don't in all cases. And usually when they don't, it has to do with strength of schedule. And in this particular case, the strength of schedule, even after this game, is going to be remarkably different. So North Carolina's, best chance, really only chance, is to win big and hope for the best. But even if they win big, getting all the way to 4, I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if they're going to jump Stanford. I mean, they might need Stanford to lose too. It's I don't know if they're going to jump Ohio State.
Yeah.
But if they don't win big, there's no starting point really for them.
Yeah, the Big Ten is set up actually quite nicely. Let's do the assumptions. We know Alabama's going to beat Florida. We know Oklahoma is in, as they don't have a Big 12 championship. If Iowa and Michigan State, that game is interesting, because if Iowa loses, some people would say, and say Clemson loses as well, that Michigan State and Iowa should be in. Is the door open for Ohio State to get back into this, despite that loss 2 weeks ago to Michigan State?
I think it'll be interesting to see what the committee does with the loser of the Big Ten game. Are they, if Iowa wins, could they really drop Michigan State below Ohio State? Would that
depends?
be,
hey, you know what? Depends how much.
I don't think it would be fair.
What do they lose by? I mean, if that logic applies to margin of victory,
there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
I mean, if Iowa runs them off the field, then maybe, But if it's a close game, not necessarily Notre Dame Stanford close last second, but it's a reasonably competitive game. Can they, would they be right in dropping Michigan State below Iowa just because they had to play a 13th game and didn't win? Iowa's situation is different because they don't have the head-to-head result with Ohio State.
Yeah.
And their strength of schedule isn't quite as good as Michigan State's. But still, Iowa, the committee last year did not punish conference championship game losers very much at all. So, I think it's interesting. But there's a possibility that if you get an upset with Clemson or Alabama, that you could end up with 2 Big Ten teams in the Final Four. But it really just depends on what else happens. You've got Stanford sitting there number 7. They've got a game with USC. They go out and they win big. Could they jump Ohio State? That's a possibility. They'll be a conference champion. But they'll have 2 losses, one of which is to a Big Ten team, Northwestern, a team that Iowa, by the way, beat by 30 in Evanston. So there's a lot of interesting scenarios if one or both of Clemson and Alabama lose, and there's not very much precedent where we can say, well, this is what the committee's done before.
Yep.
They haven't had these situations before. This is only their second year doing it.
Which is why I think it's imperative that they stick to the script, and that it's pretty easy to understand what they are holding these teams responsible to in terms of criteria. Because if you start,
unfortunately, they haven't been real consistent with that.